today's video I'm going to be taking this Farish 170 chassis, going to shorten it down so that we can use it to motorise the EMUs and things like that I'm going to 3D print. It involves, these ones have got carding shafts. It involves cutting the carding shaft, shortening it and filing off some of the metal work off the chassis block itself, and then also filing off the majority of the detail from the bogies. So I've got Steve Farmer here is helping me with this. So taking this chassis apart first of all, I'm going to put all the parts in a plastic container to not lose them. Okay, I'm just going to intersperse this video that I filmed while I was down at Paul's with some clips I've taken from home that, to give you a bit more detail on what I'm actually doing. So to take the chassis apart, obviously this is the one that I've already converted. There's two screws on the side here. Just completely undo them. They come apart nice and easy. I'll try and keep my hand out of the way of the camera. It's just a bit awkward reaching over the tripod here. So once those two screws are out, then the chassis halves just come apart nice and easy. Again, you just pull them apart. Try and leave everything else in place. So what you've got internally is your motors on the inside. You've got a little space at the bottom here. And then you've got two spaces on the side here. These will fall out if you lift the rest of the chassis up. Between the motor on each end and the bogie is your carding shaft. The top here, you've got the two clips that hold the bogie at the correct spacing. Now, when you've got the unaltered one, this will be further out on each side. Obviously, these have been moved in. Pulling it apart again is a relatively simple job. You just lift the bogie out of the chassis. That little black bit at the top just falls out. And then the carding shaft comes away from the motor end. It will still be attached to the bogie, but this just comes apart relatively simple. You just pop it out. Okay. Inside the bogie, there's a little shaft that it sits in, so you just put it back in. Again, like I'll show you a little bit later, there's a thin end on one end of the carding shaft and a fatter end on the other end. So the thin end goes within the bogie. That just helps to be able to rotate the bogie around. As you'll see a little bit later in the video, this plastic tube has been mounted on the carding shaft. So the carding shaft was cut in the middle and then 3mm taken out on each side of the cut. This one looks like someone's filled it full of crap as well. There's loads of oil in it.
So I can just look at the carding shafts, just check it out right and what I told you earlier on.
Yes.
Which way you put them in. Like I say, it just makes a clicking noise, that's all. When it goes down a tight curve, it groans and makes a clicking noise, so we can just swap it round.
So we talk about just making sure the carding shaft's the right way round there. This one is covered in crud.
Why are you doing them first?
So that the glue can harden. So we're going to reduce the carding shafts. We've taken these carding shafts out of the bogie, and then we're going to reduce them down to 27.3mm. So just going to take a cut in the middle and then approximately taking about 3mm off of each end from the middle section. And then we're using a small bit of plastic tube,
10mm long.
about 10mm long.
10, 12mm long. Oh.
Thank you. And then we'll test fit it all together to make sure we've got the right length. So that's 26.5, so we should just extend it a little bit with glue it together. So as long as it's only slightly short, it doesn't matter because the tube will hold it the correct length. That's now cut down to 27.3, so I'll just leave them to harden while we attack the chassis. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is attack the chassis, and we're going to take off this L section at the top here so that it becomes flat, and it's going to end up looking something like that when we're finished with it. I'm just taking a set of cutters to start with. Once I've cut them 4 bits off, just a large file, I'm going to file that all smooth. Okay, so the bits that we defiled and cut off were these bits here. You see how the bogie now sits out the end. Okay, but they've all been filed and cut off the end on both sides. Okay. And then the last bit of the metal work I'm going to do is I'm just going to file this inside edge to clean up the metal work here, because that's where the contacts will go through into the chassis. So the next step in the process is more of a cosmetic one. I'm going to be taking the bogie apart and removing all of the filing off all of the detail of the bogie, so that we can then glue on a 3D printed representation of an EMU bogie. To file the side of the bogies, you're going to need to set the bogie frames away from the main part of the bogie. So on the inside back here, there's a little clip that you need to carefully prise that out, and then the bogie will pull away. So you get the frame come off as a whole, and then you'll be left with the internal bogie with all the gearings in. It's a relatively straightforward job to do, but it is very delicate. So just make sure you're not over using a bit too much force on the inside of these two clips. These just clip apart. Bit of a long process. I'm not going to film this one, but essentially all I'm going to do is file off all of this detail. Okay, so I'm just going to show you sort of roughly what I'm doing. You can see on this left hand side it's filed off, and on the right hand side you can see the normal thickness from the detail. It's the sort of difference you're looking to make with it. Okay, so once you've got to this point of the process, I've filed all the detail off the bogies, shortened the cardan shaft and adjusted the chassis. It's just a case of putting it all back together how it came, and then make sure it works and tests afterwards. Putting it all back together is relatively straightforward. So the cardan shaft goes back in. The little black plastic thing on the top here goes into the top of the motor, with the little black hole on the motor end. Cardan shaft goes into the motor, and then it all just pops back in on the top there. Make sure when you got it back together that the little pip on the top of, on the bottom of the black is inside the top of the bogie. You've mounted the cardan shaft within the motor and the bogie, and then you've got the little spacer and the two spacers on each side. Okay, if when you put it back together your motor runs the opposite way to what you want it to run, you've got to take it all apart again, and then you'll have to flip the motor over 180 degrees, so it's the other way up. That's just reversing the polarity that goes through the motor. So it's a relatively simple job. The motor just pops out of the whole unit here, and you just rotate it over and put it back in. Put it back together, as we said, we've got all this lot back in here. the chassis goes back over the top, and a little bit of a wiggle. Okay, and then you put your screws back in, and then do it all back up. When you do it back up, just make sure that on the top, so I'm not going to do it up fully to start with. Get that back in there. I'll show you what I'll do, and I'll flip it over slightly once I've got both ends back together. So before you tighten, just make sure that on the top of the black plastic there's a little pip on each side. You want that in the second slot from the motor end on both ends. So you see how this one's not sat in properly? So I'm just going to pull that out ever so slightly to get it to... Oh, might need to undo it slightly. There you go. See how it's just now slotted in the little pip, and then do it back up. Just make sure you don't do it up fully until you've checked those two little pips. Otherwise, what will happen is you'll shear off this bolt here, and it'll all just fall apart in your hands. You'll have to buy some new bolts, some new spacers, sorry, not bolts. And then when you do it up, don't just over tighten it. Just do it so it's tightened up a little bit, but don't keep tightening it fully, and that'll all hold together, and that's completed. Okay, and to give you a little bit of... One thing to note when you put the card and shaft back together, there's two different ends. There's a thin end, which I've got at the top, and a thick end at the bottom. And you want to make sure that the thin end goes inside the bogie so it doesn't bind up when it goes around corners. On the top of the bogie, you get this little black plastic piece that fits into the top. There's a little hole at one end, and that hole goes towards the inside of the chassis. Okay, and then once you've got it all together, you've got a chassis that we can use within our EMUs at 63 foot length. The one thing that I would say to make note of is on the top, the black plastic bits I talked about with the little holes in the end, they've got like little pips. They sit in the second groove along from the inside, and that gives you your 63 foot length.